changes for farm animals. The Washington Post ran a shocking series of articles on conditions in the nation's slaughterhouses. In 2001, Senator Robert Byrd, a senior and influential member of the U.S. Senate, made a passionate speech denouncing the disgusting cruelty of profit-driven factory farms, the first time in decades that these issues had ever been raised in Congress. The following year, a coalition of animal organizations succeeded in getting an initiative on the ballot in Florida to amend the Constitution of the state to require that every sow kept on a farm should have enough space to turn around. Despite objections that this was not a fit subject for a constitutional amendment, there was no other way in Florida to get a proposal before the voters. Floridians voted on the substance of the measure rather than the procedures and gave it clear majority support. For the first time in the United States, a major form of factory farming had been outlawed by popular demand. The air and water pollution caused by factory farming was also in the news, sparked partly by the legal efforts of Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. and organizations like the Natural Resources Defense Council, Waterkeeper Alliance, and the Sierra Club. Kennedy, acting for several farm and fishermen's groups, won a major victory against Smithfield Foods that suggested that almost all American factory farms were violating the Clean Water Act. The Bush administration thereupon instructed the Environmental Protection Agency to weaken the rules and curtail its investigations of factory farms. Naturally, when I came back to the States, Jim and I met again and talked about this new surge of interest in the issues we'd raised in our earlier book. We had revised Animal Factories in 1990, and we thought of revising it again. But gradually, the discussion moved from the growing concern about factory farming to broader issues, including the organic food movement, the fair trade movement, and ethical consumerism in general. We therefore decided to write a book that would respond to the widespread interest in taking an ethical approach to all our food choices. The way we eat is the outcome of that discussion. Peter Singer, Princeton, New Jersey.
I was delighted when Peter returned to the United States so that we could continue our work together, exploring the issues surrounding food, farming, and fishing, subjects dear to my heart. I was raised in the 40s and 50s on a 160-acre family farm in the southwest Missouri Ozarks, living and working beside my parents, my father's parents, his sister Wilma, and my two older brothers. The family maintained an orchard, a large vegetable garden, and separate patches for asparagus, potatoes, and strawberries. We grew wheat and soybeans to sell, and corn and hay for our animals, chickens, beef cattle, milk cows, and pigs. We sold eggs and milk at local markets. Everyone worked, for there was a lot to do. Build fences, cut firewood, plow fields, then go back and pick up wagon loads of rocks, weed gardens, harvest hay and crops, clean pens, haul manure, slaughter animals, and other occasional chores. Then there were the twice-daily chores: feed and water animals, gather eggs, and milk the cows. I milked cows by hand for 12 years. That's about 8,700 milkings. It motivated me to go to college and law school. My family left farming behind, as did most of our neighbors, because, as my father put it, there's no money in it. I was 32 before I discovered why. Factory farming had taken over, and no one had noticed. That shocked me. I went to work on learning more about it for Friends of Animals. That put me in touch with Peter, who was living in New York at the time. As soon as his book, Animal Liberation, came out in 1975, I suggested that we write a book on factory farming. Peter agreed and proposed that we include photographs, as they would vividly verify the unbelievable factory conditions. Joe Keller, a professional photographer, and I traveled more than 10,000 miles in a van visiting factory farms. We spent whole days inside egg and hog factories, and afterward the smell would linger for days, even after scrubbing ourselves and our gear. As Peter says, animal factories came out with a bang and faded to a whimper. By the time the revised edition was released, I was writing An Unnatural Order and contributing articles and photographs to magazines. My story, Going, Going, Gone, for Audubon, July-August 1993, documented the wide-open trade in exotic and endangered animals at livestock auctions, and got me on CBS This Morning to explain it all to Harry Smith. My environmental activism continues to this day in the form of research, writing, and speaking about animals and farming. We're an odd couple, Peter and I, the philosopher and the farm boy, but a good team. We have complementary backgrounds in geography, ethnicity, education, family history, etc., and we work well together. Peter owns up to abstract philosophical arguments that test our ethical judgments. I'm the down-to-earth guy, true to my roots in Missouri. For my part, I tend to have wild and crazy ideas about people, places, and subjects to pursue. Whenever I would go off on these tangents, Peter brought me down to earth and back to the scheme of the way we eat. For simplicity, we've used the first-person plural throughout, although it wasn't possible for us to be together at every farm visit or interview. The use of we, therefore, should be meant to refer to both of us or either one of us. Jim Mason, Exmoor, Virginia.
Introduction. Food and Ethics. We don't usually think of what we eat as a matter of ethics. Stealing, lying, hurting people. These acts are obviously relevant to our moral character. So too, most people would say, is our involvement in community activities, our generosity to others in need, and especially our sex life. But eating, an activity that is even more essential than sex, and in which everyone participates, is generally seen quite differently. Try to think of a politician whose prospects have been damaged by revelations about what he or she eats. It was not always so. Many indigenous hunter-gatherers have elaborate codes about who may kill which animals and when. Some have rituals in which they ask forgiveness of the animals for killing them. In ancient Greece and Rome, ethical choices about food were considered at least as significant as ethical choices about sex. Temperance and self-restraint in diet, as elsewhere in life, were seen as virtues. Socrates, in Plato's Republic, advocates a simple diet of bread, cheese, vegetables, and olives, with figs for dessert, and wine in moderation. In traditional Jewish, Islamic, Hindu, and Buddhist ethics, discussions of what should and should not be eaten occupy a prominent place. In the Christian era, however, less attention was paid to what we eat, the major concern being to avoid gluttony, which, according to Catholic teaching, is one of the 7 cardinal sins. The way food is sold and advertised doesn't help. Despite the recent upsurge of farmers' markets, the overwhelming majority of America's food is purchased from supermarkets. Shoppers are not presented with relevant information about the ethical choices that surround food. Instead, the food industry spends more than $11 billion annually trying to make us crave their products. That buys an avalanche of advertising that sweeps down on us from all sides, but tells us only what the advertisers want us to know. Marion Nessel, a nutritionist who worked in the U.S. Department of Agriculture and on the Surgeon General's Report on Nutrition and Health, 1988, has described how the food industry has crossed ethical lines in bringing political pressure to bear on what should be dispassionate scientific government advice on how Americans can eat a healthy diet. Morgan Spurlock's Super Size Me raised serious ethical questions about the contribution of fast food chains like McDonald's to America's epidemic of obesity. Our focus is not on these issues. There's already plenty of information out there about them. If you enjoy unhealthy food so much that you're prepared to accept the risk of disease and premature death, then, like a decision to smoke or climb Himalayan peaks, that's primarily your own business. Our focus is on the impact of your food choices on others. A new awareness. Over the last 30 years, we've seen the first stirrings of a different kind of concern about what we eat. Many people have stopped